Under the glitter of Nashville lights, few knew the agony hidden behind the smiles of its brightest stars. A voice silenced by pain and a legend consumed by illness. From deadly infections to cruel degenerative diseases, these icons paid the ultimate price for their fame. This is the heartbreaking truth behind 11 country stars who died of horrible diseases. Stories Nashville would rather forget. 1. Johnny Cash, The Man in Black and the Battle Within. Johnny Cash was more than a country singer. He was the sound of America's soul. From the prison anthems of Folsom to the pain-soaked ballads of Hurt, his voice carried the weight of redemption and regret. But behind that powerful baritone and black attire, Cash was fighting a silent war against his own body. In the final decades of his life, illness became his cruelest adversary, one that even his legendary will could not defeat. Cash had been plagued by health problems since the 1980s, many of which stemmed from years of drug abuse, exhaustion, and the relentless demands of fame. He was diagnosed with autonomic neuropathy, a rare and degenerative condition that damages the nervous system, affecting everything from blood pressure to breathing. The disease left him weakened and frequently hospitalized. For a man who had once walked tall in front of tens of thousands, the loss of control over his own body was unbearable. Yet, Cash's greatest strength was his defiance. When doctors told him to stop performing, he refused. He kept recording in the studio, often from a wheelchair, his voice frail but still haunting. In 2003, just months before his death, he recorded Hurt, a Nine Inch Nails cover that would become one of the most emotional farewells in music history. The video, showing an aging Cash reflecting on his life surrounded by fading memories, left audiences in tears. It wasn't just a song, it was his confession. His wife, June Carter Cash, stood by him through every collapse, every hospital stay. When she passed away in May 2003, a part of him died too. Johnny followed her only 4 months later, on September 12, 2003, from complications of diabetes that had ravaged his already fragile body. He was 71. In the end, Johnny Cash turned his suffering into art. His body may have failed, but his music became immortal, a bridge between pain and poetry. Nashville still speaks his name with reverence, for no one embodied both the darkness and grace of country music quite like the Man in Black. Let's move to the next one. Tammy Wynette, the First Lady of Country and the pain she couldn't escape. Tammy Wynette's voice could break hearts with a single note. Her songs, especially Stand By Your Man, defined an entire generation of women and shaped the sound of country music forever. But behind the beauty and strength of her voice lay years of physical agony, addiction to painkillers, and a body slowly destroyed by disease. While fans saw a glamorous icon in sequins, Tammy lived much of her adult life in hospitals, fighting pain that never truly went away. Her health troubles began early. After a series of mysterious abdominal pains in the late 1960s, doctors discovered she suffered from chronic bile duct infections and complications from repeated surgeries. Over the years, Tammy endured more than 30 major medical procedures, including multiple surgeries on her stomach, gallbladder, and intestines. The constant pain drove her to rely on powerful painkillers, including Demerol, a drug that would later define much of her suffering. As the 1970s rolled on, her dependency deepened. Nashville insiders whispered about her frailty, her collapses backstage, and her need for medical supervision before every performance. Yet Tammy never stopped working. The stage became her escape, a place where she could still appear strong, even as her body betrayed her. Her private life, too, was filled with turmoil, a string of broken marriages, including her famously stormy relationship with George Jones, left her emotionally and physically drained. By the 1990s, Tammy's condition had deteriorated beyond recovery. She performed while hooked up to medical equipment and kept touring despite warnings from her doctors. In April 1998, at just 55 years old, she died in her sleep at her Nashville home. The cause was listed as a blood clot in her lungs, but those who knew her said the real killer had been years of relentless pain, addiction, and exhaustion. Tammy Wynette's death shocked the country music world, not just because she was gone too soon, but because of how much she had endured to stay on that stage. Her story remains one of country music's most tragic, a portrait of a woman who gave everything, including her health, for her art. 3. Keith Whitley, the voice that whiskey silenced. Keith Whitley was destined to be one of country music's greatest legends. His smooth Appalachian voice carried both heartbreak and sincerity, reminding fans of the raw honesty that built Nashville's golden era. But behind his gentle tone and effortless performances was a man trapped in an endless battle with addiction, one that ended his life far too soon. Whitley didn't just sing about pain, he lived it until the bottle took everything away. Born in Kentucky, Keith showed promise early on, performing bluegrass as a teenager and quickly earning respect for his natural phrasing and emotion. By the mid-1980s, he had become one of country's rising stars, with hits like Don't Close Your Eyes and When You Say Nothing at All. His career was exploding. Radio adored him, fans idolized him, and Nashville called him the future of traditional country. But behind the spotlight, Whitley was sinking deeper into alcoholism. Those close to him recalled how his charm and humor often masked the darkness he carried. The pressures of fame, constant touring, and the perfectionism he demanded of himself led him to drink heavily. He suffered from liver damage and severe dehydration, and doctors repeatedly warned him that another binge could kill him. Yet, like many artists before him, Keith believed he could handle it. That the next drink would calm his nerves, not end his life. On May 9, 1989, Whitley was found dead at his home in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. His blood alcohol level was 4.7, nearly 5 times the legal limit. He was only 33 years old. The official cause? Acute alcohol poisoning. His wife, country singer Lori Morgan, later said she never saw anyone fight harder to stay alive, even as he slowly destroyed himself. Whitley's death devastated Nashville. His posthumous releases became haunting reminders of a man whose voice carried both beauty and warning. Artists like Alan Jackson and Chris Young still cite him as a major influence, proof that his brief life left a long shadow. In a world where fame and loneliness often walk hand in hand, Keith Whitley's story remains one of country music's most tragic cautionary tales. 4. Patsy Cline, the angel voice, haunted by a fragile heart. Before her untimely death in a plane crash, Patsy Cline had already faced a lifetime of pain and illness that most fans never knew about. Her voice, smooth, mournful, and full of emotion, made her a legend. But behind that radiant smile and confident stage presence, Patsy carried a body constantly betraying her. Long before tragedy struck in the skies, her health had already been fragile, and her strength on stage was often an act of defiance. Born Virginia Patterson Hensley in 1932, she grew up in poverty, working her way through the rough edges of early country music with sheer determination. Her rise to fame was a slow climb, filled with rejection, long nights, and endless travel, all of which took a toll on her health. By her mid-20s, she had already been hospitalized several times for rheumatic fever and a serious throat infection that threatened her singing voice. Doctors warned her that her heart had been weakened, likely from the earlier illness, and that she needed to rest. But Patsy never slowed down. Even after a horrific car accident in 1961, one that nearly killed her and left her with permanent pain, she returned to the stage within weeks. Fans saw her as unbreakable, a woman of pure steel wrapped in sequins. But privately, she struggled to breathe at times, suffered dizzy spells, and relied on medication to manage the damage from both her heart condition and the accident. Her close friends later said that she often performed through pain severe enough to make her faint backstage. In 1963, just as her career was reaching its peak with hits like Crazy and Sweet Dreams, Patsy boarded a small plane with fellow musicians. The crash near Camden, Tennessee, instantly ended her life at just 30 years old. While the official cause of death was the crash, those closest to her believed her weakened heart and constant exhaustion made her more vulnerable than anyone realized. Patsy Cline's story is a haunting reminder that even the brightest stars can burn themselves out from within. She gave the world a voice that still echoes through every country ballad sung today. Proof that pain can create beauty and that courage sometimes comes at the highest cost. 5. Merle Haggard, the rebel who fought his final war with cancer. Merle Haggard was the voice of the working man, raw, defiant, and honest to the bone. His songs like Mama Tried and Okie from Muskogee spoke for those who felt forgotten, the outlaws and dreamers of small-town America. But even as he grew into one of country music's most enduring legends, Haggard faced a slow and brutal battle against a disease that would silence his voice forever. Lung cancer became the one opponent that even this hardened rebel couldn't outsmart. Haggard's early life was marked by hardship. Born during the Great Depression, he lost his father at a young age and drifted into trouble, spending time in San Quentin prison before music saved him. That tough upbringing gave him the grit that defined his career and the habits that later came back to haunt him. Decades of smoking and touring left his lungs scarred, but Haggard never imagined he'd pay for it with his life. By the late 2000s, Merle began experiencing serious breathing problems. In 2008, he was diagnosed with lung cancer and underwent surgery to remove a part of his lung. For most people, that would have been the end of their career. But Haggard wasn't most people. He was back on stage within months, joking with fans that he was singing better with half a lung. His resilience amazed Nashville, and his performances carried a deeper weight, a man singing against time itself. Still, the disease never truly left. In the following years, he was in and out of hospitals with recurring infections and pneumonia. Each tour took more out of him, but he refused to stop. "When I quit singing," he once said, "that's when I'll die." Those words proved prophetic. In April 2016, on his 79th birthday, Merle Haggard passed away at his California home after a long battle with pneumonia, worsened by cancer. His death felt like the end of an era, the last outlaw leaving the stage for good. But even as his body failed, Haggard remained what he'd always been, a storyteller for the forgotten, a voice for the broken. His final songs were filled with reflection, gratitude, and a quiet acceptance of fate. Nashville mourned not just a legend, but a man who had lived every lyric he ever wrote. 6. Glen Campbell, the Rhinestone Cowboy's cruel descent into silence. Glen Campbell was once the golden boy of country pop crossover, a singer, guitarist, and TV icon whose charm lit up the stage. With timeless hits like Rhinestone Cowboy and Gentle on My Mind, he brought country music to mainstream America. But behind that dazzling smile and polished stage presence, Campbell was slowly losing the one thing that defined him: his mind. His battle with Alzheimer's disease was one of the most heartbreaking journeys ever witnessed in Nashville, a slow fade into the very silence he once filled with music. For decades, Campbell had been one of Nashville's hardest workers. He played as a session guitarist for icons like Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra before his own star rose in the late 1960s. Fame came fast, and with it, chaos, alcoholism, broken marriages, and public scandals. But by the 2000s, Campbell had found stability until he began forgetting lyrics, missing cues, and losing his way home. In 2011, doctors confirmed his worst fear: Alzheimer's disease, an irreversible brain disorder that erases memory and identity piece by piece. Instead of hiding his diagnosis, Glen did something remarkable. He went public. Alongside his wife, Kim, he launched a farewell tour and a documentary titled I'll Be Me. It showed his courage and confusion in equal measure, moments of brilliance on stage, followed by heartbreaking lapses off it. Millions watched as the Rhinestone Cowboy fought to hold on to his music, even as the disease stole his words. It was both inspiring and devastating. As the illness progressed, Campbell could no longer play guitar or recognize his family. By 2016, he was moved to a full-time care facility. His final years were quiet, marked by occasional flashes of the man he once was: a smile at a familiar song, a soft hum to a forgotten tune. On August 8, 2017, Glen Campbell passed away at age 81, leaving behind a legacy of courage, melody, and vulnerability. In the end, Alzheimer's took his memory, but not his music. Songs like Wichita Lineman and By the Time I Get to Phoenix remain etched in country history, proof that while disease may silence the body, true artistry echoes long after. Glen Campbell's final years weren't a fall. They were a testament to the grace of facing the inevitable with music still in your heart. 7. Mel Street, the country crooner crushed by his own darkness. Mel Street had a voice that could melt steel, smooth, aching, and pure country to the core. In the 1970s, he was Nashville's next big thing, a man whose songs about heartbreak and loneliness sounded painfully authentic because they were. But behind the music was a tortured soul consumed by illness, not of the body, but of the mind. Mel's battle with severe depression and bipolar disorder led to years of silent suffering that no applause could cure. His story is one of the most tragic in country history. A man undone not by fame's absence, but by its unbearable weight. Born King Malachi Street in 1935, he spent his early years working odd jobs before finding his calling in music. By the time he released hits like Borrowed Angel and Smoky Mountain Memories, his rich baritone made him one of the purest traditionalists of his generation. Fans heard heartbreak in his songs. What they didn't know was that Mel was living every word. Behind the scenes, he was trapped in cycles of despair, mood swings, and self-loathing that even his closest friends struggled to understand. The pressures of fame only worsened his condition. In an industry that glorified strength and masculinity, mental illness was a taboo, something to be hidden, not healed. So Mel hid it. He self-medicated with alcohol and painkillers, masking the deep depression that doctors later identified as a form of manic depressive illness, what we now call bipolar disorder. By the late 1970s, his condition spiraled out of control. His marriage suffered, his finances crumbled, and the hits stopped coming. On October 21, 1978, his 43rd birthday, Mel Street walked into his bathroom, took a gun, and ended his life just hours before a scheduled appearance on a local radio show. The country world was stunned. There had been no warning, no farewell note, only silence where a voice once lived. After his death, fellow artists described him as the best singer country music never got to fully know. In later years, awareness of his struggles helped open Nashville's eyes to the realities of mental health, a conversation long overdue. Mel Street's death remains a painful chapter in country music's story, a reminder that even the strongest voices can be lost to invisible pain. His songs, filled with sorrow and sincerity, still echo like a haunting confession from a man who sang too close to the truth. 8. Troy Gentry, the star who faced death twice. Troy Gentry wasn't just one half of the duo Montgomery Gentry. He was the heart of it. Known for his deep voice, easy grin, and fearless stage energy, Troy embodied the blue-collar spirit of country music's modern era. Fans saw him as unstoppable, a man who could ride the highs of fame without losing his roots. But behind that confident image was a man who had already survived one brush with death, a private battle with a rare and aggressive form of cancer that few ever knew about. And when death came again, it arrived in the cruelest possible way. Born in 1967 in Lexington, Kentucky, Troy started out singing in local bars before teaming up with Eddie Montgomery in the mid-90s. Together, they stormed the charts with hits like Something to Be Proud Of and My Town. Their sound was gritty and unapologetically Southern, the voice of Middle America. But fame brought its own burdens. Years of relentless touring took a toll on Troy's body. In the early 2010s, he was quietly diagnosed with a rare type of lymphoma, a cancer that attacks the immune system. Determined to fight, he underwent months of treatment, keeping his illness private from fans. He told close friends that he didn't want pity, only the chance to keep singing. Miraculously, Troy went into remission. He returned to the stage stronger than ever, often saying he felt like he'd been given a second life. But that life would be heartbreakingly short. On September 8, 2017, Troy was scheduled to perform in Medford, New Jersey. Before the show, he took a helicopter ride, a hobby he loved. Moments after takeoff, the engine failed. The pilot tried to make an emergency landing, but the aircraft crashed, killing both men instantly. Troy was 50 years old. The news shattered the country community. It seemed impossible that someone who had just conquered cancer could be taken so suddenly. In his honor, Eddie Montgomery released the duo's final album, Here's to You, featuring Troy's last vocals. The songs, especially Better Me, became hauntingly prophetic, echoing his quiet acceptance of life and death. Troy Gentry's story is one of triumph, shadowed by tragedy. He fought disease with courage and faced fate with grace. In Nashville, his name still stands for resilience. A man who beat cancer but couldn't escape destiny's cruel design. 9. Naomi Judd, the country matriarch, broken by an invisible illness. Naomi Judd's story is one of brilliance and unbearable sorrow, a woman who rose from poverty to build one of country music's most successful duos, only to be undone by an illness that fame could never cure. As one half of the Judds, Naomi stood beside her daughter Winona, blending motherly warmth with artistic grace. Together, they sold more than 20 million albums and redefined what female power in Nashville could look like. But while the world saw a glowing star in red hair and rhinestones, inside Naomi was fighting a relentless enemy: severe clinical depression that she would later call a disease of the mind that tries to convince you life isn't worth living. Born Diana Ellen Judd in 1946, Naomi's early life was marked by struggle. She raised two daughters alone in small-town Kentucky, working as a nurse before turning to music. When the Judds burst onto the scene in the 1980s, their harmonies felt like hope, family, faith, and healing wrapped into sound. But as their fame exploded, Naomi's mental health began to deteriorate. The pressures of constant touring, perfectionism, and the weight of public expectation pushed her into deep cycles of anxiety and despair. In 1991, she was diagnosed with hepatitis C, likely contracted during her nursing days, and retired from performing. Though she physically recovered after treatment, the emotional toll lingered. The end of the Judds left her lost. Over the next 3 decades, Naomi battled recurring episodes of depression, panic attacks, and insomnia. She sought help through therapy, medication, and even electroconvulsive treatments, but relief never lasted long. Her daughters, Winona and Ashley, often spoke of her courage and fragility in the same breath. Naomi was open about her illness, even writing a memoir titled River of Time, where she described how mental illness lies, isolates, and steals your joy. Yet, despite her honesty, the pain persisted. On April 30th, 2022, just one day before the Judds were to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, Naomi took her own life at her Tennessee home. She was 76 years old. Her death sent shockwaves through the music world, not just because she was loved, but because she had fought so hard for so long. Naomi Judd's passing was a painful reminder that success cannot silence inner suffering. Her legacy, however, remains one of resilience and truth. She turned her pain into purpose, urging others to seek help and break the stigma around mental illness in Nashville and beyond. 10. Charley Pride, the trailblazer, silenced by a modern plague. Charley Pride was more than a country singer. He was a pioneer who shattered barriers and changed the face of Nashville forever. As the first black superstar in a predominantly white industry, Pride rose from humble beginnings to become one of country music's most beloved voices. With over 50 top 10 hits and classics like Kiss an Angel Good Mornin', he proved that talent transcends race and prejudice. But in the end, it wasn't old age or the hardships of his past that took him. It was a new kind of enemy, invisible and merciless: COVID-19. Born in Sledge, Mississippi in 1934, Pride worked the cotton fields before chasing two dreams: baseball and music. When the first failed, he turned his soulful voice toward country songs, quickly winning the hearts of millions. His charm was quiet but powerful, his delivery sincere and warm. In the 1970s, he stood toe-to-toe with legends like Merle Haggard and Conway Twitty, yet always carried himself with grace. Off stage, however, Charley battled years of subtle racism within the industry. He handled it not with anger, but with dignity, a testament to the strength that defined him. As he aged, Pride remained active, still performing with the same gentle energy that first made him a star. But in late 2020, during the height of the global pandemic, he performed at the Country Music Association Awards, his final public appearance. Just weeks later, he fell ill. Despite receiving medical care, his condition worsened rapidly. On December 12, 2020, Charley Pride passed away at age 86 from complications related to COVID-19. His death shocked Nashville and left fans questioning how such a beloved icon, who had survived every storm of the music industry, could be lost to something so sudden and unseen. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from every corner of the world. Dolly Parton, Reba McEntire, and Darius Rucker called him a bridge between generations and races. The loss of Charley Pride wasn't just the end of a voice. It was the closing of a chapter in country music history. Charley once said, "I'm just proud to be part of this family called country music." And Nashville will always be proud of him. His story is a reminder that even heroes are not immune to fate, and that the quiet strength he carried through life was perhaps his greatest song of all. 11. Hank Williams Sr., the broken heart that built country music. Hank Williams Sr. wasn't just a country singer, he was the foundation of the entire genre. His songs defined what country would become: raw emotion, heartbreak, and the unfiltered truth of the human condition. With classics like I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry and Your Cheatin' Heart, Hank transformed suffering into poetry. But behind his meteoric rise was a frail, tormented man whose body and mind were slowly destroyed by chronic illness, addiction, and exhaustion. His death at just 29 years old wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable end of a body that had been breaking for years. Born in 1923 in rural Alabama, Hank grew up poor and sickly. As a child, he developed spina bifida occulta, a painful spinal defect that left him with constant back pain. The condition worsened with age, especially under the strain of long tours and grueling performances. In a time before proper medical treatment or understanding of chronic pain, doctors prescribed morphine and alcohol, a deadly combination that would eventually consume him. By the early 1950s, Hank's fame had reached mythic heights. His voice carried a loneliness no one could imitate, and his songs became anthems for broken souls everywhere. Yet behind the curtain, his health was collapsing. He drank heavily to numb the pain, relying on morphine and barbiturates to sleep. Friends described him as a genius trapped inside a dying man's body. His performances grew erratic, his marriage fell apart, and Nashville, the very town he built, began to turn its back on him. In late 1952, Hank was fired from the Grand Ole Opry for missing shows and appearing drunk on stage. Desperate to rebuild his career, he agreed to a New Year's Eve concert in Canton, Ohio. But he never made it. On January 1st, 1953, his driver found him dead in the backseat of his Cadillac. He had been taking morphine, chloral hydrate, and alcohol to ease his pain during the trip. The official cause? Heart failure. But the truth was more complex. His body had simply given out. Hank Williams Sr. left behind only 66 recordings, yet his influence is endless. Every generation of country artists, from Johnny Cash to Garth Brooks, carries a piece of him. His life was short, but his suffering gave birth to a sound that would define America's soul. In the end, Hank Williams didn't just die of illness, he died of everything that made him human: pain, passion, and the need to turn both into song. His ghost still haunts Nashville's heart, reminding us that behind every legend lies a man who hurt more than he ever let the world see.